How you doing? My name is Reggie Sinkler, and I'm a teacher, author, and researcher of ancient African history. My book is called The Powerful Facts You Don't Know About the History of Blacks, and I wrote it because I took a trip to Egypt, traveled down to Nubia, and saw things that shocked me, even though I had studied it for over 30 years. And I made a promise to our ancestors inside the temple that I'd spend the rest of my life dispersing the truth. I promise you this book will be easy to read because it's just about giving you a list of facts, which was somehow omitted when we studied subjects like world history or ancient history in school. I'll leave it up to you to answer the question of why you and I were not given this knowledge, and to take some time to think of the impact not learning these historical facts about Black people has had upon how they are perceived today by other races. This is the timeline. Notice at the top it starts at 27,000 BC. Up until about 50,000 BC, Black Africans were the only people on Earth. Now I bet your teacher didn't teach you that. How come? That's why I call it the powerful facts you don't know about Blacks.
Africans with jet black faces once walked the earth all alone, no other races, until they traveled to the other lands colder than the motherland, and then the cross began. That's when the frost began, the pigment loss began. The further north this man traveled as he crossed new land. The man in the ice who once walked in the sand, soon he began to lose his
This is a figure, a sculpture that was found
Yet on the
in
inside,
Europe. And one of the things that they have
he was still
discovered
African.
is that many of the sculptures of early Europe show various African types. In fact, 55,000 years ago, according to 3 labs, the University of Oxford, the University of Hawaii, the University of California at Berkeley have come to the conclusion that there are no people on the earth 55,000 years ago who are not Black Africans.
That was Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. May he rest in peace. Next, you're going to hear from Dr. Charles Finch, who's going to tell you that the first Black Africans who were here alone are the ancestors of every single human on Earth today. The fact is, there is but one race, the human race. So racism should be officially over. We're all Africans under the skin.
One thing that is indubitably clear is that Africa is the cradle of the entire human race. From 4 million years ago, all the way up to 200,000 years ago, the stepwise sequence leading in an evolutionary progression from early pre-human hominid ancestors all the way up to modern human beings occurred in Africa and Africa alone. Not that there weren't any migrations out of Africa, but those migrations did not have any impact on human evolutions leading up to modern human beings until after our human beings in fact left Africa. Now what do I mean by that? A man by the name of Wainscott from England has said is that all of the populations around the globe are descendants from small founder populations that left Africa probably no later than 100,000 years ago. This means that, as C.W. Stringer has said, that all 6.5 billion people on this planet are Africans under the skin. Because if we go back far enough, everyone has
Africans with jet black faces once walked the earth all alone, no other races, until they traveled to the other lands colder than the motherland, and then the cross began.
Purity or inferiority. And so for approximately how many years
man traveled as he
was
crossed
the
new
world
land, the man in the
populated
ice who once walked in the
exclusively
sand,
and only
soon he
by
began
Africans,
to
Black
lose his
Africans?
taste.
Okay, black skin.
If you're talking about the modern, the last
sapiens,
African, okay,
uh-huh.
because you see, the African is not only the first hominid, he's also the first human. Okay, the hominid is not completely human like us, but then comes the first human with our brain case. That's also African. And this begins to change about 55,000 years ago in Europe, where you get Africoid types becoming Caucasoid types.
Once again, this woman
Ladies
would
and
have
gentlemen,
been how old?
Asa Hilliard. May he
250,000 years
rest in
old.
peace.
Now, just by way of comparison, the oldest Homo sapiens sapiens bones that we find in Europe are 50,000, about 40,000 to 50,000 years old. This is the Grimaldi skeletons that were found in the Grimaldi cave.
So you have the African, how long ago now?
You have the African at least 200,000 years before they moved to the European continent.
And the European comes on the scene when?
Well, the African comes on the scene in Europe approximately 50,000 years ago. In other words, the first European was an African too, and is still an African. It's just an African who has changed.
And once again, what happened to that African once he got to Europe?
Well, you had several ice ages and a change in environment, and the theory is that the change in environment, and especially the ice age part of it, being cut off from the African continent, having a completely different environment with respect to diet and climate and all those things, resulted over a 20,000 year period in physical changes, genetic mutations to adapt to that particular environment. And about 20,000 years or so ago, we have changes sufficient that we look and see distinct people when they really aren't distinct in that sense, in the sense of having groups that can't interbreed. That's what one of the biological definitions of race is, that groups can't, a dog and a cow can't have offspring, so they would be different strains, but varieties of the same family, so that the European that resulted was merely a depigmented African.
I call this idea important because it was Africans who were the first people of history to attempt to live righteously in harmony with God and each other, and to list the improper behaviors that we now call sins, that they believed God would one day ask every person to confess to. Africans alone not only conceived how this day of judgment would take place, they also described Judgment Day and all of their spiritual beliefs in great detail on papyrus, the African plant whose dried leaves were spread and written upon. They had to have a clear vision of Judgment Day to paint it, huh? Take a look at how they painted it. This is the judgment scene of the ancient Africans of Nubia and Kemet. They believed on Judgment Day your heart would be weighed against the ostrich feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth, justice, and righteousness. Now, if your heart was heavier than the feather, it indicated too many sins had been committed to gain entrance into heaven. Also, an African invention. That's right, Africans invented heaven. Your teacher never taught you that, right? Now compare the judgment scene for yourself. On the left, you got the scales of justice you see in every courtroom. Wonder where they got those scales from, compared to on the right. No coincidence. So no coincidence that in 711 AD, thousands of African Muslims, mostly from Senegal, invaded Spain, France, and Portugal.
But not all Africans came to Europe as
Your
raiders.
teacher didn't tell you.
Some came as conquerors. We'll call that the royal wave of African migration. And to discuss this migration, we have to specifically talk about the Moors and the Berbers. There are no two people more qualified to discuss those topics than Dr. Ivan van Sertima and Dr. John Henrik Clark. Who then were the Moors, and why did the Portuguese and Spanish hate them so much?
Well, the Moors controlled Spain and Portugal, but the Portuguese freed themselves from the domination in 1240. They hated them because they were foreigners who were ruling over them.
Were the Moors Arab or black?
They were a mixture, but mainly black. The word Moor came into the language meaning blackamoor. And when the English speak of marshlands or dark places, they speak of it today as the Moors.
In other words, the negative connotation came from domination.
Yes.
Okay.
But the Moors introduced a lot of things into Spain. They gave Spain the greatest material culture it ever had before.
Were the Moors basically out of that Moroccan area, or were they from
No,
further
they're out
south?
of the Senegambia area and out of the area now marked on the map as Mauritania.
Okay.
And they were descended. LeBlanc and Halle Bourguiba's book on the Moors and on the conquest, she says the army was as black as ink. The general was blacker still. What made the general seem to be blacker than the rest? He was the only one riding a white horse.
See, they never teach you in school that a black army ever invaded a white army. By the way, those black states 700 years after the invasion. You never were taught this either. That Plato wrote in his dialogue that he was ashamed of going to school in Egypt when he compared it to Greece. He said the school in Greece was for pigs, not human beings. He was ashamed for all of Greece. Listen to Dr. Obenga.
He said that he became more alert and more human being. He became more, you see, Malone became a more human being. Not just human being, you became a more yourself. You achieve your destiny when you go to Kemet school. You became a human being, more human. We are a human being already, but more human being. That means more wise. And when you go to Kemet school, when Plato himself compared what they do in Kemet school, I give Greek because it will be no debate. You see, it's our school in Greece, the way we are doing things is just for creatures like pigs. You see, like pigs. You see, and he said, myself, I'm ashamed. Myself as a plate, I'm ashamed. We do things like that, is a shame. And also, not only for myself, for all Greek, the Greek world is a shame. What we can do, our education, when you compare with a Kemet, is not even for human beings, it's just for pigs.
What about Egypt that's so important to you? Give some specifics you would ask me. Well,
listen to Dr. Ben.
The specifics that I would give are such as...
Here comes some more powerful facts about blacks that you don't know.
The concept of a god or a goddess. Unfortunately, some of you don't know that they're goddesses. But it is only logical that a goddess preceded a god. That's number one, that we have to deal with your Bible. That means that Adam and Eve, you can take it, go home, and put it where it's supposed to be. Egypt gives you your concept of a God. The whole moral philosophy that goes behind human behavior. A book stolen by the Jews in a story of a man called Moses, who was, according to even that book, an Egyptian. Born in the city of Goshen, your Bible said in the book of Exodus, it said that Moses was born in the city of Goshen, and another thing it says in your Torah or Old Testament, he was learned in the ways of the Egyptians and even became a priest. Now, what is a priest? You read the thing, you don't know what it is, you didn't ask them any questions. A priest was a man who went into the system of education, which you call the mystery system, from age 7, at the time when he was circumcised and brought in. At age 47, 40 years of training, studying the 7 liberal arts, science, law, engineering, all that goes with it, and he had qualified in each of his degrees, he became known as a priest. So that means that you who spent 4 years for your bachelor's, 2 years for your master's, and another 2 or 1 depending for your doctorate, you would have just begun to study. And you're talking about a long time of study. You would have been there 40 years without ever going to see your parents or anyone else.
Yeah, these are the powerful facts that you don't know about blacks. Because your teacher never taught you. They tell you that Africans had the first organized school system in the world? Huh? Heck no. No other people had such a vast amount of knowledge. Only in Africa could you take courses. High level math, algebra, trigonometry. The facts you don't know. And they hurt us.
Ancient Egyptian. Logic, arithmetic, astronomy, geometry, and music, what we call the 7 liberal arts. This was the educational system that was in place at the time that Greek people came to Kemet.
Now go back and show who the people were that established this.
Take a look at the people that built the first university.
The images you showed earlier.
Okay, the images that we're showing are these people. See, now I just skipped back to the 12th dynasty, but in this dynasty, these people were teaching trigonometry. In other words, we have papyri with math problems on them, the Rhine papyrus, the Moscow papyrus, with problems on them. These papyri were written in the 12th dynasty, and they had problems not only in geometry, but also in trigonometry. That just gives you an example of how highly developed mathematics.
But you don't know. Listen to Dr. Charles Smith. He'll show you what ancient math homework looked like in the black African schools of Kemet, which you call Egypt, probably. The Rhine papyrus contains written problems in trigonometry.
Get my glasses on.
Here's one.
Read this a little bit.
Dr. Charles Fincher, Morehouse University. Look him up.
Yes. Problem number 56 in the Rin mathematical papyrus, that's the one you see up there, seeks to find the slope of a pyramid whose height is 250 cubits and whose base is 360 cubits. The answer is 5 and 1/25 palms for each cubit in height, representing the cotangent of the angle of the slope of the pyramid's face. Now, if you've got a cotangent, if you can find cotangents, you know the way you can find tangents is that you flip the cotangent over. It's the inverse of a tangent. The other thing, too, just look at that.
There wasn't
Imagine
even a
that
place
pyramid
in the world named
three-dimensional.
Europe
That's what it's
when
supposed
Africans
to be.
were doing trigonometry.
Now, all you really have to do is inscribe a triangle inside that pyramid. A right triangle whose height is also the same as the height of the pyramid. Therefore, the face becomes the hypotenuse. And half of the pyramid's base becomes the base of that right triangle, and then the height of the pyramid becomes the height of the right triangle. When you have all that in place, and it's really just a matter of drawing it in, you then can find sine and cosine. So now, if they had the tangent and cotangent and the ability to find sine and cosine, by definition, they have trigonometry.
Hello. Homer said that Africans were advanced educationally. He stated, in medicine, Egypt, which real name is Kemet, leaves the rest of the world behind. Now see, in 1650 BC, that's when the Africans wrote the Rhine papyrus. Europe had the first country, Greece, in 1000 BC. So this is 600 years before Greece began. And Europeans weren't even writing.
We find in the Rin mathematical papyrus, we find formulas for the area of the rectangle, which is problem number 6. This is the Rin mathematical papyrus. There are, I think, 4 mathematical papyri that have been discovered. One is the Moscow mathematical papyrus, showing you the area of a rectangle, or the formula for obtaining the area of a rectangle, A equals L times B. This is problem number 14 of the Moscow papyrus. This is the formula for finding the volume of a truncated pyramid. Now, the volume for a truncated pyramid gives you volume equals height, 1/3 the height, times A squared, AB plus B squared. This is actually more difficult than finding the volume of the total pyramid. So if they could, check on the job says, he who can do more can do less. So if they can find the volume of the truncated pyramid, they also knew the volume of the pyramid, how to find the volume of the pyramid. 1/3 of the height times area squared.
This is problem number 56, also from the Rin Mathematical Papyrus. This is a problem that allows them to demonstrate how to find the slope of the pyramid. And in this problem, they actually deal with cotangents, showing that they had also not only begun their studies in geometry, but also in trigonometry as well. Among these ancient people of the Nile, these ancient black peoples of the Nile, we find the first evidence of algebra, because in the Rin Mathematical Papyruses, number 24 to 27, are algebraic equations of the first degree. They also handled algebraic equations of the second degree. Algebra is basically, if you have to strip it down to its essentials, its ability to solve problems when you have an unknown. Now, we call that unknown usually X or Y. The ancient Kamites used to call it a quantity.
Now I got one for you. Bet you didn't realize Africans were labeling the parts and functions of the brain at a time when no European could read or write, and what they call ancient Greece wasn't even born yet. How is it ancient? Just something to think about. Check this out. Dr. Charles Sinkler.
This is the interior portion of the cranium, which is described by the ancient Kamites. I might just mention that they described the results of what happens to injuries to the temporal portion of the brain. The physicians in the room know that in the front part of the temporal portion of the brain is Broca's area, controlling articulate speech. Behind Broca is Wernicke's area, controlling processing and understanding of sounds and language. You get a lesion or an injury to the Broca's area, you get expressive aphasia. To Wernicke's area is receptive aphasia. Expressive aphasia means you slur your words. Receptive aphasia means that you can't understand what's being said to you, so you speak in meaningless babble. The ancient Egyptian, and by the way, an injury to both, you can get injury to both, which is total or mixed aphasia. The ancient Egyptians describing this in the Edmund Smith Papyrus. So they have not only described the sort of macro surface of the brain, they had described the cortical functions of certain areas of the brain nearly 4,000 years before Broca's experiments 120 years ago, 130 years ago.
I'm telling you, once you read my book, you can prove to people what you're saying, because they're not going to believe you. Like, take a look at this. This man's name is Imhotep, the first doctor in history. The Greeks called him Ascapularis, and when you say his name in the Hippocratic Oath, that's how you become a doctor. But nobody knows it was an African man that lived 2,000 years before the Greeks. Check out Imhotep.
If there is such thing as a father of medicine, it is this man or it is no one, Imhotep. Even though he lived 3,000 years before Hippocrates, we actually know more about him than we know about Hippocrates. We knew who his parents were, we knew where he was born, where he was raised, what he did. He was, as Sir William Osler, and this was Osler's institution right here. Osler practically founded this institution, did he not? Osler said of Imhotep, and by the way, Osler himself was, I've read some books by Osler. Osler was no joke. He was real. He was a real Renaissance physician, one of the last in this country anyway. And what does he say about Imhotep? The first figure of a physician to stand out clearly from the mists of antiquity. Or as I like to call him, the first universal genius of whom we have any knowledge. He was prime minister under Djoser, so therefore a statesman. He was renowned as a philosopher and a purveyor of oral wisdom. He was an architect of genius, having designed and built the step pyramid of Saqqara, but above all, he was a divinely gifted physician. So great was his renown as a physician that by the 6th century BC, he became deified as a physician and worshipped by the Greeks, including Hippocrates, because Asclepios was identified with Imhotep. So when you worship Asclepios, you would worship Imhotep. So in the Hippocratic Oath, when the physician says, I swear by the god Apollo and I swear by the god Imhotep, I swear by Asclepios, he is in fact swearing by Imhotep.
Sometimes called Ascapularis. One of the greatest men that were never known. The Edwin Smith Papyrus contained treatments for various sections of the brain. The Ebers Papyrus was a medical text on contraception. It's before the first European country. And St. Clement of Alexandria said if you had a book of 1,000 pages, you couldn't put all the Greeks who went to school in Egypt. That's how many they had.
But you, in trying to become and make yourself equal, everything got to be equal. I'm not equal to nobody. I am it. To learn mathematics, and I gave the world 1 to 9. When the world didn't have anything, I was counting. I had a written language I call Medu Nature, the writing of the gods. There was no Greece and no Etrusca and no Pyrrhus yet. That later became Rome and Greece. When I was going into chemistry, I left my writing in 100 of them that now they even call the Rockefeller Papyrus, the Edwin C. Smith Medical Papyrus. This Edwin C. Smith is a surgical papyrus dealing with operation in the human spine, 1700 BC, 700 years before Rome or Greece.
Tell him, Dr. Ben. Edwin Smith Papyrus, 1700 BC, contained treatments for various sections of the brain. The Ebers Papyrus from 1500 BC was a medical text on contraception. Keep in mind, there was no Greece yet. St. Clement of Alexandria wrote, if you had a book of 1,000 pages, it wouldn't be big enough to put all the Greeks that went to school in Egypt. And even those that didn't go claim they did, because it was prestigious. They used to brag about it.
What we said about cardiovascular physiology also applies to anatomy. It is in ancient Egypt, 6,000 years ago, that you had the first systematic studies of anatomy, the first anatomy textbooks, the first anatomy anatomical lexicon. This is the skull, the external skull, and all the topographical landmarks of the skull are demarcated in a technical language. This is one of the things that is fascinating about the Edwin Smith Surgical Papyrus. It is the first technical language, technical and scientific language in the world.
We can't think that so sophisticatedly, but yet we give to the world the concept of Planned Parenthood under Queen Pharaoh Hatshepsut. She ruled from 1580 to 15 to 1480. And Hatshepsut had gotten her scientists, her pharmacologists and so forth to provide her with a method to stop pregnancy while she was administering the affairs of state, being the first woman to rule a nation. Not only did she rule, she became the only woman, the only person to rule as a king and a queen simultaneously, stating that if she is to rule the country as the king, then she must look like the king. So she put on a false beard, men's clothing. Don't get her wrong, because she had 2 babies. And then got her scientist. That is called today the Ebers Papyrus, of course, Ebers with Z, so it had nothing to do with it.
Okay, let's, again, it's really important to keep the analogy together. The first Greek that we have on record is Homer, and that's approximately 850 BC. If there was such a person, many literary critics suggest that there were many people and their writings were collected together and then given the name Homer. But be that as it may, at that point, Greek people were not actively involved in the educational system as far as going to school in Africa. But starting around the time of P.T.A.H, which would be in the 5th century BC, P.T.A.H went to school. We have records of the Greeks themselves. These things are in standard history, so what I'm saying is not a mystery. P.T.A.H went to school, came back, advised Pythagoras to go to school. Pythagoras went to school in Africa, was taught for 22 years in Africa. We know the subjects that he taught, that he studied. We know the location where he went to school. We know the name of his major professor. Following Pythagoras, other pre-Socratic Greek philosophers began to go to Egypt for their education. Plato went to school for 12 years in Egypt. Aristotle moved his school when Alexander the Great, his pupil, conquered Egypt. He moved his whole school to Egypt in order to be closer to the source of Egyptian knowledge. In fact, the habit by Greeks of going to school in Egypt was so ingrained, and they valued it so much, that they say that even people who had not gone to Egypt to study would make up biographies to pretend that they had gone, because you had very little legitimacy if you hadn't actually gone to what at that point was the center of higher education in the world.
It has nothing to do with the reality. So, I'm fond of asking young black students is, why are you afraid of mathematics? Why do you run away from mathematics and physics? Africa invented mathematics and physics. That isn't my opinion, that just happens to be the reality. I didn't make it happen. That just happens to be the way it is. And the Greeks themselves say so, not once, not twice, but at least a dozen times. All the Greek mathematicians studied in Egypt. Eudoxus, Archimedes, Hipparchus, Pythagoras, Thales, Plato. In fact, the Greeks were in a habit, if they didn't study in Egypt, they would say they would in order to give themselves credibility.
It's written about that. They recognize that the word of this Sophia, wisdom, doesn't make sense to our language. That's me. Their education will come from somewhere else. This is why one of the founders of the early church, Omer, he said that the best doctor in medicine, we found them in Kemet. The best doctor to heal you, to cure you, it came from Kemet, not from the best in the world. They came from Kemet. You find them in Kemet. The best doctor in medicine, you find them in Kemet. Next, you say, yes, this by Omer. This one, Thales, if time I will focus on him because he's the first philosopher, the first wise. There are 7 wise only in antiquity. This is the first wise, the first philosopher, the first scientist, the first. So we can see his CV. He came from where? From Princeton, from himself, from dream, from where? So when you check, he's a CV, he's one of the Kemet students, the first student. Yes, and he went back, he built a school there, the first. So after, if you have time, we'll focus on him special, like I did in a book. Next. So let's go quick, all of them. This guy is, they have the picture too. This is Solo. We give a law, the lawgiver in Kemet, Solon. Yeah, he give a law to Kemet, legislator, something like that. But he spent much of time in Kemet studying in Nocrates, in Sais Temple, and then Heliopolis, Iunu. You see, he studied there to give a law. Well, now they say the rule of law, the rule of the law. But the first people who give law in Western civilization, they were Kemet students. This is one of the first of them. Yes. Now they say the rule of law, they may spread the rule of law everywhere in the world. But they didn't start. They didn't start the rule of law. It was in Kemet. And this is the student who started in a Western civilization. Yes. You see? Now they pretend everything belongs to them. Now they give back to the world. You see? And this also, you see, all of them systematically, all of them. This one, Pythagoras. Of course, we know Pythagoras. There is no Pythagoras, you see. When the text said that when Plato learned that these people, they have their knowledge from Kemet, so he decided to go to Kemet himself. Yes. And he built a school. He is one of the genius in wisdom, in philosophy, in Sophia. But they didn't have the word Sophia. So he spent 22 years in Kemet to study. In Memphis, Mennefer, in Heliopolis, and Waset in Thebes too. And he stayed there. They say, I want to know this. I want to go to the temple. They say, no. You don't go to the temple. He say, why? Because you are not circumcised, you see. You must be circumcised so you can go. To go this place. He said, look, Dumutu, the first Greek in the world in history to be circumcised is God. Yes, the first. So he can go to the higher level to do his PhD, we can say. You see?
In 1984, at the Nile Valley Conference, Dr. Asa Hilliard presented a paper on the Kemetic concepts in education and cited the significance in P.T.A.H as a center of learning, or P.T.A.H as a center of learning during the 18th dynasty. It was both a center of religion and education, since the two could not be separated in the minds of the Kemites. It housed an elite faculty of priests/professors. It has been estimated that at one time there were more than 80,000 students at all grade levels studying at P.T.A.H University, Abdullah, 1984. Temples were at the center of religion, politics, and education. The faculty were called Hersetha, or Teachers of Mysteries, and were divided into departments, Maya, 1900, as follows. 1. Mystery Teachers of Heaven, Astronomy and Astrology. 2. Mystery Teachers of All Lands, Geography. 3. Mystery Teachers of the Depths, Geology. And 4. Mystery Teachers of the Secret Word, Philosophy and Theology. And 5. Mystery of Pharaoh and mystery teachers who examined words, law, and communication. Much has been written about the mystery schools of the Nile Valley, but one important factor must be remembered. These schools and the subjects taught within them were a mystery only to those who were unfamiliar with that system of education. The purpose of education in the Nile Valley was to create a society where citizens would understand the relationship which existed between themselves and the universe. In the truest sense of the word, the educational centers in the Nile Valley were the first universities. Upon closer examination of the complexities of Nile Valley education, one can begin to understand why they were called mystery schools by many of the foreigners who came there seeking enlightenment. That's from Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization by Anthony T. Browder. And the question is, how do you educate yourself?
Thank you very much. This is the Powerful Facts book cover that you want to look for. Just go to Amazon.com, ask for Reginald Stanley Sinkler. The book is $3.99, and you'll get 50 facts just like the one you just took a look at. Okay? The powerful facts you don't know about the history of blacks. It's chock full of things that people need to take a look at. All right? It's all a part of my company, P.T.A.H Productions, for the proper teaching of African history. You can go to Facebook. I have history pages. Go to Amazon.com. I have books and ebooks. The proper teaching of African history is all I'm about. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please check out the book. Peace. And remember, the power is in the knowledge. Join the glorious struggle to maintain and stand solid. One people on a mission for truth. Don't believe what they said about you. Go out and get the proof. P.T.A.H Productions. Because far too many have no idea what Africans have done. Hope you enjoyed the video.